Let's get one thing straight. Silence is a response. And when you're dealing with a dismissive avoidant, that silence, it's not random. It's not because they forgot you. It's not because they're just busy. It's calculated. It's protective. And it says way more than their words ever could. You're over there racking your brain, refreshing your messages, wondering what you did wrong, while they're sitting in their silence like it's some kind of fortress. And I get it. It hurts like hell because you're craving connection and they're dodging it like it's the plague. But here's the truth bomb I need you to hear. Their silence is not about your worth. It's about their wiring. And once you understand why dismissive avoidance goes silent, you'll stop taking it so personally and start taking your power back. So today, I'm breaking down the 5 real reasons dismissive avoidants stay silent. And trust me, it's not what you think. When a dismissive avoidant goes silent, one of the biggest and most misunderstood reasons is emotional overwhelm. And I'm not talking about the kind of overwhelm you or I might feel in a stressful situation. This goes deeper. See, when someone is dismissive avoidant, their entire nervous system is wired for self-protection. From a young age, they learned that emotional closeness wasn't safe. Maybe they grew up with parents who were emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or even cold. So now, as adults, when intimacy starts to build or emotions run high, whether positive or negative, it triggers something primal inside of them. Not love, not connection, threat. You need to understand this. To a dismissive avoidant, closeness can feel like danger. It can feel like drowning. So when things start to feel too much, whether you expressed love, asked for more intimacy, got upset, or simply showed up with emotion, they get hit with a tidal wave they don't know how to ride. And since they were never taught how to process, regulate, or sit with that emotion, they default to the one strategy that feels safe: retreat. And how do they retreat? With silence. This isn't a conscious plan most of the time. They're not sitting there thinking, I'm going to hurt you by ghosting you. No, this is automatic. It's a survival strategy. Their silence is their shield. It's their way of shutting down a system that feels like it's overheating. It's like their internal alarm is screaming, too much, shut it down, disengage now. So they do. They disappear. They detach. And that silence, it's the space they use to emotionally regulate, not with you, but away from you. Now, here's the brutal part that makes this so painful if you're someone who's emotionally open or anxious in your attachment style. Their silence is the exact opposite of what you need. You need reassurance, closeness, communication. You want to talk things through. You want to connect, and they just vanished. That contrast creates agony. It creates that crazy-making loop where you start overanalyzing every text, every conversation, every moment, trying to figure out what triggered their shutdown. You think it's about you. You think you messed it up. You didn't. Their silence isn't punishment, it's protection. And it has nothing to do with your worth. This is why it's so important to stop personalizing a dismissive avoidance silence. When they're overwhelmed, they don't have the tools to reach for connection. They reach for distance. That's their safety. That's their pattern. And here's what most people miss. Dismissive avoidants often don't even realize they're overwhelmed. They just know something feels uncomfortable. They might describe it as needing space, feeling suffocated, or not being ready, but under the surface, they're running from the emotional energy that feels unfamiliar and unsafe. Think about that for a second. Love feels unsafe to them. Affection feels intrusive. Emotional expression feels like too much. It's heartbreaking, right? But it also explains why they ghost, why they pull away after moments of intimacy, why they go quiet when you express your needs. It's not that they don't care, it's that caring too much triggers their alarm system. And this emotional overwhelm doesn't just happen during conflict. It can happen after a great date, after a deep conversation, even after a romantic night. If it feels too close, their system recoils. They'll shut down before they even understand why they're doing it. They'll tell themselves they're just busy or tired or not ready, but really what's happening is an internal storm they never learned how to navigate. So what can you do? You honor the truth without betraying yourself. You stop chasing their silence. You stop begging for breadcrumbs. And most importantly, you remember this, you are not too much. Their overwhelm is not your fault. Their silence is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their capacity. And if they ever grow, if they ever do the work, It will start with them recognizing that this pattern of shutting down is not sustainable. It costs them relationships. It costs them depth. And until they learn how to sit with their discomfort instead of running from it, they'll keep choosing silence over connection. So the next time a dismissive avoidant goes silent, instead of spiraling, take a deep breath. Ground yourself in the truth. You didn't cause their emotional overwhelm. But you do get to decide whether you want to keep participating in a dynamic where silence is the default and your needs are the casualty. You deserve emotional safety. You deserve communication. You deserve presence. And if someone's nervous system can't handle that, that's not your burden to fix. That's their journey to face. Fear of vulnerability is one of the most deeply rooted reasons why dismissive avoidants stay silent. And it's not just a casual discomfort with opening up. It's a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. To truly understand this, you have to go back to how they were wired. Dismissive avoidants often grew up in environments where emotional needs were either ignored, dismissed, or punished. Maybe they reached out as children for comfort, for validation, for affection, and they were met with coldness, disinterest, or even ridicule. So they learned something critical, something that shaped the rest of their emotional life. It's not safe to be vulnerable. So what happens when they become adults and enter relationships? That same wiring follows them. The moment a relationship starts to require emotional depth, real connection, or raw honesty, that fear kicks in like a reflex. Vulnerability feels like exposure. It feels like weakness. It feels like danger. So instead of leaning in, they back away. And how do they back away? Through silence, through emotional distance, through withdrawal. Because if they speak, if they share, if they let themselves be seen, they risk rejection, judgment, and most terrifying of all, dependence. They have a core belief that says, if I open up, I will get hurt. So silence becomes the armor. It becomes the barrier they put between themselves and the terrifying possibility of being known. Vulnerability to them isn't about connection, it's about risk. And they're not wired to take emotional risks, they're wired to survive. So they silence themselves, not because they don't care, but because they care just enough to be scared. Scared of being vulnerable and having that vulnerability used against them. Scared of needing someone and being disappointed. Scared of being seen and then abandoned. And here's the thing, they may not even realize this fear is driving their silence. It's so automatic, so deeply embedded in their subconscious that it just feels like instinct. You might express something emotional or open up about your needs or simply ask them to share and they go quiet. Not because they're trying to manipulate you, not because they're trying to be cruel, but because inside their nervous system, alarms are going off. Don't say too much, don't feel too much, don't need too much. That's the voice in their head, and it's been there for years. This fear of vulnerability doesn't just show up in deep conversations. It shows up in the little moments too. When they dodge talking about the future, when they deflect serious topics with humor, when they give vague answers or shut down during emotional intimacy, silence becomes their default setting. And that silence protects them from the one thing they fear the most, being emotionally exposed. But here's where it gets even more complex. On some level, they do want connection. They do want to be loved. They do want to feel close. But their fear of vulnerability hijacks every attempt at intimacy. It's like driving with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. They want to get close, but they're terrified of what happens when they do. So they stall, they pull away, they disconnect, and you're left confused, wondering why everything was going well until it suddenly wasn't. You were getting closer, and that closeness triggered their deepest fear. And what makes this dynamic even harder is that dismissive avoidants tend to be highly independent. That independence isn't just a personality trait, it's a defense mechanism. It keeps them safe from needing anyone because needing someone means trusting them. It means opening up. And that's exactly what they're trying to avoid. So instead of expressing what they feel, they shut down. Instead of saying, "That scared me," or "I'm feeling vulnerable right now," they go silent. They ghost, they pull back. It's not because they don't have feelings, it's because they don't feel safe expressing them. So what do you do when someone's fear of vulnerability creates this wall of silence between you? You stop trying to break down the wall for them. You stop begging for words that they're not ready to say, because their silence is not a challenge for you to solve. It's a wound they have to heal. And until they recognize that their silence is driven by fear, not strength, they'll keep mistaking withdrawal for control. But the truth is, silence doesn't protect them from pain. It protects them from connection. And eventually, that silence doesn't just hurt you, it isolates them. If you're on the receiving end of this silence, hear this loud and clear. Your emotional openness is not the problem. Your vulnerability is not too much. Their fear is not your responsibility. You can be patient, you can be compassionate, but you can't shrink yourself to fit into someone else's emotional limitations. You deserve someone who isn't afraid of the very thing that builds love, vulnerability. And if someone chooses silence every time things get real, that says more about their emotional readiness than it does about your worth. So yes, fear of vulnerability keeps the dismissive avoidant quiet, but don't let their silence convince you to quiet your own needs. Let their silence teach you what they still need to heal and what you no longer have to carry. Control is a driving force behind the silence of a dismissive avoidant. It might not look like control on the surface. After all, they're not yelling, they're not demanding, they're not overtly trying to manipulate the situation. But that silence, that withdrawal, that's their way of staying in control when emotions start to rise. For a dismissive avoidant, emotional intimacy is unpredictable. It's messy. It comes with expectations, vulnerability, and the possibility of disappointment. And because they don't trust that they can handle all of that without losing themselves, they resort to silence as a way to manage the situation on their terms. When a dismissive avoidant feels things are getting too intense, whether it's conflict, closeness, or even love, they instinctively start pulling the strings of control. And silence is their favorite tool. Why? Because silence allows them to regain emotional distance. It gives them space. It removes the pressure. And most importantly, it puts them in the driver's seat. In their mind, if they can create enough distance between themselves and the emotional energy of the relationship, they can stay safe. They can stay independent. They can keep their autonomy intact. But what's really happening is this: they're trying to control you without ever saying a word. Think about it. You text them and they don't respond. You open up emotionally and they go quiet. You try to clarify what's going on and they disappear for days. It throws you into a loop. You're now waiting, you're wondering, you're analyzing every detail of the last conversation. You're emotionally destabilized and they're calm, removed, in control. That silence, it forces you to chase. It keeps you guessing. It keeps them one step ahead emotionally because you're reacting and they're retreating. And that's exactly what they want, even if it's unconscious. See, a dismissive avoidant learned early on that being in control of their emotions and their environment kept them safe. Needing someone, relying on someone, being emotionally dependent, it all felt too risky. So they developed a kind of emotional self-sufficiency that looks like strength, but really it's fear wrapped in armor. They don't want to risk being vulnerable, and they don't want to feel like someone else holds power over their emotional state. So instead, they hold the cards close to their chest. They say nothing. They give little. And in doing so, they maintain the upper hand. This need for control also plays out in the way they manage closeness. They may come toward you when they feel ready, when they feel safe, when they want intimacy. But the moment you start needing more, the moment the relationship starts to feel emotionally demanding, they withdraw again. It's like they're constantly calibrating how much closeness they can tolerate without losing control. And when it exceeds their limit, they go silent. It's not a punishment. It's a regulation tactic. They're trying to restore emotional balance, not between the two of you, but within themselves. What makes this dynamic so exhausting is that their silence feels like rejection, but it's actually about control. They're not necessarily trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves. They believe that silence keeps them from being overwhelmed, from being pulled into emotional depths they don't feel equipped to handle. And in doing so, they avoid the discomfort of communication, of confrontation, of emotional labor. But make no mistake, their silence still causes harm, because you're left in a state of emotional limbo, constantly unsure of where you stand, constantly trying to earn back their attention, their affection, or even just their presence. Here's the trap. When you're with someone who uses silence to stay in control, you start adapting. You start shrinking. You stop bringing up your needs. You stop expressing your feelings. You walk on eggshells because you're afraid of triggering another shutdown. That's the power of their silence. It conditions you to expect less, to settle for less, and eventually to lose parts of yourself just to keep the peace. But that's not connection, that's not love, that's control. So how do you deal with it? You take your power back. You stop letting their silence dictate your self-worth. You stop chasing after someone who uses withdrawal as a way to manage their discomfort. Because here's the truth. Real intimacy requires two people willing to sit in the mess of emotion together, not one person holding all the emotional cards while the other is left guessing in the dark. If someone uses silence to control the pace, the closeness, and the emotional tone of the relationship, they are not emotionally available. And no amount of chasing, explaining, or proving will change that. The only thing that breaks the cycle is boundaries. You have to recognize when silence is no longer a pause, it's a pattern. And if that pattern keeps you feeling small, confused, or unworthy, it's not love. It's emotional control disguised as self-protection. So yes, dismissive avoidance goes silent to maintain control, but that silence doesn't have to control you. When you realize that, you stop waiting, you stop explaining, you start honoring your own emotional truth, because your voice deserves to be heard, and anyone who consistently chooses silence over connection isn't ready for the kind of relationship you deserve. Emotional suppression is one of the most defining traits of a dismissive avoidant, and it's a major reason why they stay silent. These are people who have learned, usually from early life experiences, that emotions are not safe. Whether it was through neglect, punishment, or emotional invalidation, they received the message that expressing feelings was either pointless or dangerous. So they adapted. They pushed their emotions down, locked them away, and trained themselves to stay disconnected from what they feel. And over time, that emotional detachment didn't just become a habit, it became their identity. Silence, then, isn't just a reaction, it's a deeply rooted strategy for survival. When you engage with a dismissive avoidant and you open up emotionally, when you cry, when you express love, when you share vulnerability, you're stepping into a space they've spent years trying to avoid. That kind of raw expression feels foreign to them. It creates a kind of emotional pressure they don't know how to handle. They may not even have the language for what they're feeling, let alone the ability to share it. So instead of engaging, they shut down. Instead of exploring their emotions, they suppress them. And instead of connecting with you, they go silent. It's not that they don't feel anything. That's a dangerous myth. Dismissive avoidants do feel, sometimes deeply, but they don't know how to process what they feel. They don't trust their emotions. They don't know how to sit with discomfort, how to name their inner world, how to safely express what's going on inside. And because they don't know how to regulate those emotions, they avoid them altogether. Suppression becomes their coping mechanism, and silence becomes the evidence of that suppression. This can be incredibly confusing for their partners. One moment, things seem fine. You share something meaningful, or you open up about your needs, and then suddenly they're gone, quiet, distant, disconnected, and you're left wondering, what did I do wrong? But it's not about you. It's about them. It's about the emotional flood that's happening inside of them that they've learned to drown out. Silence, in this case, is the way they regain control. If they stay quiet, they don't have to admit they're overwhelmed. They don't have to face what they're feeling. They don't have to risk saying something they can't take back. Their silence keeps them safe from their own inner chaos. Sometimes their emotional suppression is so deep that they genuinely believe they don't have strong feelings. They may even tell you things like, I'm just not that emotional, or I don't think about it that much. But what's really happening is emotional numbing. They've disconnected from their inner world so completely that even when big emotions do come up, like fear, love, grief, or longing, they shut it down before it reaches the surface. And when someone is that disconnected from their own emotional truth, sharing it with someone else becomes almost impossible. This kind of emotional suppression creates a one-sided dynamic in relationships. You're showing up, being vulnerable, offering depth, and they're giving you silence. You're trying to build intimacy, and they're stuck in survival mode. And over time, that imbalance becomes unbearable. You start to feel emotionally alone in the relationship. You start to carry the weight of the connection on your own shoulders, and you begin to doubt whether you're even wanted or loved. Because when someone refuses to express how they feel, their silence feels like indifference, even if it isn't. And here's where the pain cuts deep. You know there's something under the surface. You see the glimmers. You feel the connection. You sense the emotion in the small moments, in a look, a gesture, a moment of vulnerability that slips through. But then, just as quickly, it's gone, shut down, buried under silence, and you're left chasing ghosts, hoping that one day they'll finally open up, that one day they'll finally feel with you. But when emotional suppression is their default setting, that day often doesn't come unless they do the deep, difficult inner work to reconnect with themselves. And let's be clear, suppressing emotions doesn't mean they don't leak out. They do, just in dysfunctional ways. Through passive aggression, withdrawal, coldness, or sudden bursts of anger or frustration that seem to come out of nowhere. That's what happens when feelings are bottled up instead of processed. The silence may seem calm, but underneath it is a storm of unacknowledged emotion waiting to erupt. So what can you do when you're with someone who uses silence to suppress their feelings? You stop trying to pull emotion out of someone who spent their entire life pushing it down. You stop making their silence mean something about you. And most importantly, you start honoring your own emotional reality because you deserve connection. You deserve words. You deserve someone who's willing to meet you emotionally, not just disappear when things get real. Silence for the dismissive avoidant is comfort. It's protection. It's how they avoid the vulnerability of feeling. But for you, it's a kind of emotional starvation. You can't build intimacy with someone who refuses to feel out loud. And if they continue to choose suppression over expression, silence over connection, you have every right to choose yourself over waiting. Let's get real. Silence from a dismissive avoidant is not just about needing space or being low drama. It's a defense mechanism. It's control. It's fear. It's emotional suppression. And it's conflict avoidance disguised as calm. You've probably spent way too long wondering what you did wrong, why they won't talk to you, or why it feels like you're begging for basic emotional connection. But their silence? It's not about your worth. It's about their limitations. Dismissive avoidants stay silent because it protects them, not the relationship. And until they face their own patterns, their own emotional wounds, and their own fear of intimacy, that silence will keep repeating. It will keep hurting. It will keep pushing people away. You can't heal someone's avoidance with more patience. You can't decode their silence into love. And you sure as hell can't build a relationship on a foundation of emotional withdrawal. So if you're dealing with a dismissive avoidant who constantly goes silent, let that be your clarity, not your confusion, because love is not silent. Love shows up. Love communicates. Love stays present even when it's hard, and you deserve that kind of love, the kind that doesn't disappear when things get real, the kind that talks, the kind that grows, the kind that feels safe, not silent,